Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of the Zen AM Thoughts podcast. I am your host, Rob, aka Zen, and I guess I'm here to talk about my thoughts. There was a couple of different topics I wanted to go over today, um, but I had a discussion yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Today is Friday. Well, the wee AMs of Saturday, I should say, August 20th. It is 1 a.m. Um, so I was talking with Drew the other day as I was playing Tower of Fantasy, doing my collectibles. Stay tuned for the next podcast episode, by the way, because I'm going to talk about Tower of Fantasy and how I've been strangely enjoying that game. But anyway, uh, as I was playing through that game, I was chilling with Drew on Discord, and we were just having random conversations here or there as he was setting up his home theater system or putting figures away or doing stuff, house stuff. We kind of talked about video game consolidation. Somehow we got onto that topic. Um, and it's a topic that I am very I think I'm more optimistic about the state of the overall industry than a lot of other people that are, I want to say, around my age that have been following video games for a very long time. Um, it's the game industry, the landscape right now is very different than it was even like 5 to 10 years ago. Um, and it these sort of discussions popped up um you know many years ago when like Activision and Blizzard merged together, and then I was like, interesting. Right? And then you think about how EA would buy studios and then shut them down, like not even a couple years later, right? Like the teams will put out like one game, it wouldn't live up to EA's expectations, and studio fails, and they'll get rolled into either the Battlefield team or the studio just shuts down on they you would it became a scenario where like if a video game company got bought out, it was the end, right? Because they were going to get picked up by EA, they were going to get picked up by Activision, they were going to get picked up by Microsoft, and this is the era of like Microsoft getting Rare, and it was a period where like Rare they didn't do anything, right? They did Viva Pinata, which was really cool, and then it was like nothing out of this beloved studio for a very long time until Sea of Thieves, and even that was kind of rocky. But that gets into more modern day Microsoft, and that game is very successful now. But anyway, the idea of consolidating companies was very scary, um, and the idea that a select few companies, we think right now, Microsoft, Sony, EA, Embracer Group being a big one on the scene right now, um, Apple to an extent, um, having a small number of companies like it's a scary idea, right? Monopoly, a monopolized industry is never really a good thing, but I think video games right now is in a really unique spot than it was before. Like we're not in the same days where there was only like four publishers. You know what I mean? Um, Even the companies that are getting bought out now. So to back up a little bit, one of the biggest um, stories or headlines out of this was Microsoft looking to acquire, because they're still going through the process, Activision Blizzard. This comes off the heels of Microsoft buying and merging with Bethesda, ZeniMax, which that's a huge get, right? You think about ZeniMax and Bethesda Studios, and you're getting id, which is the Doom guys, right? You get Arcane, you get Machine Games, you get Tango Gameworks, you're getting Fallout and all of that stuff. That's huge get on top of the 23-ish indie studios that they picked up over the last couple of years. And then you're thinking, oh, now they're acquiring Activision Blizzard. Isn't that too much for one company? Um, and in some ways, I think, sure, you can make that argument, but also there's so many more developers and publishers and indie devs, and this space is a lot bigger now than it was before, in a way that makes me look at this kind of merger and think it's really not that big of a deal. Because like Activision Blizzard, Activision Blizzard of today is a very different Activision than like when I grew up, right? Um, Activision when I grew up, like that was a bunch of licensed games. That was Crash Bandicoot. That was like uh well, I mean, I guess Activision got Crash later, right? Um but even then we thought of Activision pumping out more of those games. You think about pumping out more of like Spyro and some other, like, not necessarily shovelware per se, but like they were definitely the house that was throwing anything out, you know what I mean? Or publishing a bunch of different games. Um and then Modern Warfare happened, right? And that changed the landscape for Activision and their overall trajectory. And it became less about all of these other side projects or IPs that they owned and stuff. And it became doubling down on Call of Duty, doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down, um, to the point where all of their internal studios at this point are just Call of Duty support studios. Um, and I think that is far less healthy than Microsoft stepping in to purchase them, um, and with their language talking about freeing a lot of those IPs that have laid dormant. Like, this is the first time in a very long time where I thought, oh, Crash Bandicoot may actually live. Um, because you think like the last two games were successful, right? Like Crash 4 happened, and that's a really great game, and you had the remakes of the previous trilogy. In Toys for Bob, I was like, yo, this series is in great hands. And then Toys for Bob gets turned into a Call of Duty support studio. And it's like, well, this is disappointing. And looking at how Microsoft has been very hands off, on the studios that they have acquired so far, and just letting the teams do what they want to do and giving them stability, to do that stuff, I think is actually pretty good. I think that's a good relationship. I think that's a far better relationship than them being stuck in a scenario where they're forced to work on things that they don't want to work on. And also in an environment, if we want to bring in Activision Blizzard specifically, where it is very awful work conditions, all around. Um, so I look at consolidation in mergers. Um, I think about like, what does that specific merger or consolidation mean for the companies that are being merged? And when I think about Microsoft, um, well, I should say modern day, current Microsoft, right? Phil Spencer's era of Xbox Game Studios. Um, I think they're probably in pretty good hands. right? Just going off of how they've treated their studios so far. And that could change in the future, right? Nothing's set in stone. I may not always hold this position, but I think this could lead to us seeing more creativity out of these studios that have been bled dry, right? Um, I think about smaller studios like Ninja Theory, um, like who else did they pick up? They picked up Compulsion Games. They picked up um there was another studio that they picked up too that I mean they picked up like 13 or 23 studios. So the We Happy Few guys, I think it was. And you have these studios that are like working paycheck to paycheck essentially, right? Like they're one bad release away from closing their doors. And I don't like that feeling, you know? If them getting bought by a good company or a company that will fund them to do the things that they want to do while remaining largely offhand on their projects, I think that's a win for one us as consumers in a way of just we're going to get a product that the developers clearly love and are very passionate about. Um, and if you think about the Microsoft side of things, that'll be on Game Pass, which is that's a whole nother topic. I think that's an amazing service. Um, but also the developers themselves are in conditions where they don't have to worry about feeding their family or about having a job. So I think in instances like that, I think this is overall like a net good. In situations where in the past where you had like EA would bring in a studio and close it down, I think that's awful. So I don't think some people look at the mergers that are happening and immediately go into like a doomer mode. Um, there's there's a mutual I have on Twitter. Um, I love them to death. They are great people. Um, and I just think, and anytime I see the announcement, the thing I hear in my head, like the moment I see it, is just like, well, this is horrifying. Um, which is the general reaction to any sort of big merger, and I understand why you would feel very um doomer about it, for lack of a better word, at this hour. Um, but I think you have to look at these things at a case by case basis, and I think Activision Blizzard being absorbed into the Microsoft family is an interesting move. I think it's pretty much a win on most sides of that issue. Um, so long as, you know, they maintain like the commitments that they've already set forth and talked about, right? Um, I think I think people forget, and I think I said this at the top, people don't really realize how large this industry has become. And I think we need to stop putting some of these companies that we used to hold as really high pedestals. I think we need to take them down a little bit, right? Um, they're major companies for sure, but I think the landscape is filled with a lot more developers and a lot more publishers, both big and small, um, and a lot more talent than we seem to give credit for. Just because Activision Blizzard goes to Microsoft doesn't mean that video games are coming to an end. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Um, because we're always going to have more developers out there putting more games out, especially with all of these storefronts and stuff, giving more time and presence to smaller developers. It's like, yes, these bigger companies may take like 3 or 4 years between releases, but what's pushing the industry forward between those releases? A lot of these smaller developers, and there's always going to be more of them than like the 23 studios under the Microsoft banner, you know? Um, that being said, Embracer Group is kind of wild. I think Embracer is at like a count of like 120 studios with over like 500 IPs just under their belt. So I think they're a unique, or not unique, but fascinating story in all of this. And um, I know they said they're committed to putting out a lot of the like re-releases for a lot of the IPs that they picked up. Um, Maybe even seeing new entries into a lot of those games, which I think would be great. If Embracer can take a lot of those IPs that they picked up, because I think they have like the Soul Reaver and stuff licensed and stuff now, right? They have a bunch of stuff. They just bought the rights to well, what was it? Is it Lord of the Rings or something? Um, and I mean they have THQ Nordic under their banner and stuff like that too. Yeah, Gearbox. If they could take a lot of those dormant IPs that just haven't seen releases in the last like 10, 15 years and put stuff out, I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool because the companies themselves prior to that were not going to do that. Um, Either by choice or by just thinking about a numbers game where it's like, oh, these titles that don't sell too well, we can't afford to do that because we don't have the capital to do that and we have to try to make a big hit. Uh, which then goes back to my point earlier about being folded into a bigger company and being offered like a blank check to just do what you want to do. And now you don't have to worry about that. And then you can work on the IPs that you're very passionate about. So I don't know. We'll see. Case by case, right? So we'll see what Embracer Group does. Um, I see Square Enix in the corner propping themselves up. I wonder if my position will change if they get picked up by somebody. We'll see. We'll see. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where I stand right now on video game consolidation. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think it's going to be okay. I think some of these companies probably should have folded a long time ago or been broken up a long time ago. Activision is not the Activision of before. Um, EA is currently being like restructured in a way. Uh, so yeah, we'll see. But anyway, those are my thoughts for right now. Um, I appreciate you guys for listening. Um, I'm gonna do something here. I'm going to take. I'm gonna make a post on Twitter about this, but as I sign off here, uh, I'm gonna take questions. And I don't know if I'm gonna work them into this show or I'm gonna take them into the main podcast. I want to do something with that. Um, and I may not answer them on the next episode, but they're going to be stored in a bucket. And we're going to get to them. But if you have any questions for me, topics that you want me to talk about here, questions for any of the main JSB GamesCast crew members, send your questions to jacksavagebase@gmail.com. Subject line questions. And we'll see what we can do with that. I'm very curious to see if we can do some fun stuff with that kind of thing. So with that, thank you guys for listening. I'll be back next week. I know the upload date changes. I'm trying to sort it out, but life be life in. So like I said, I'm committed to one a week. It's just finding that day. It just might pop up randomly. But anyway, thanks guys for listening. I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.